Okay, good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock. Welcome to the Cabinet meeting. Just a reminder, this meeting is broadcast live via the County Council's website. It's archived and can be viewed afterwards. Due to the current situation, only 3 members of the Cabinet are present in this room, myself, Blake and Lee. The remaining members of the Cabinet are joining us on Skype, along with the officers that are presenting. Can I ask you all to keep your microphones off when not speaking so we don't get feedback? And if you do want to speak, if you IM me, and that's that little box in the bottom left-hand corner, Kat, who's with me here, will remind me who wants to speak in case I miss you. In terms of people that I know who want to speak, who needn't instant message me, I've got Byron, Terry and Max who've already indicated they want to speak. In terms of voting, once the recommendations have been moved and seconded, I will call each person, not in order, in the order of Payne, Blunt, Breckham, Old, Pendleton, Richardson, Rhodes and Shepherd. And all you'll need to do is say whether you are for or against the recommendation, and Jenny will then be able to tally it up and see whether things were passed or not. Okay, so if we move straight on to the next thing, which is apologies for absence, and we don't have any. Next agenda item is minutes. I understand Mr. Rose wants to suggest a slight amendment to the minutes, so I'll call Byron now to move his amendments to the minutes, and then if we agree, I'll move them. Byron?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On the minute 384, which refers to Melton Mowbray Distributor Road, in order to explain it a little bit better, in the second sentence, after the words 20% of 70 million estimated cost, I think if we put in there of the road and school infrastructure, and then carry on, would be funded by the Housing Infrastructure Fund grant. And then in the last sentence, proceeding with this, therefore, currently relied on the County Council forward funding in the region of 56 million, with no indications to how it would be recouped. That would be a more accurate representation of what was said.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you, Byron. I agree with you. You've mentioned it to me before the meeting. So with those amendments proposed, can I ask if that is agreed? So I'm going to have to call you all now and you just say yes or no in order. So I'm starting with Blake Payne. Blake, for or against?
Yes, agree.
Richard Blunt, for or against?
For.
Lee Bracken, for or against?
For.
Ivan Old?
For.
Trevor Pendleton?
For.
Louise Richardson?
For.
Byron Rhodes?
For.
Richard Shepherd?
For.
And myself, I'm for. So with those, that is now passed, so the minutes are approved. We now go to urgent items, which are none. Declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. The first report on the agenda provides an update on the local response to the coronavirus pandemic. It includes a recommendation for the Council to make a loan to Bredgate Park Trust. As Chairman of the Trust, I have a personal interest leading to bias and will leave the room during consideration of this part of the report. I'll ask officers to cover the other matters raised in the report first so I can be part of that discussion. I will then leave the room. I understand, Mr. Payne, you have an interest?
Thank you, Leader. Can I declare an interest in item 8 on the agenda, which is the mainstream and special educational needs homeschool transport policies? It's the usual personal interest, non-pecuniary. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members who aren't here don't need to declare anything. So for coronavirus COVID-19 impact and response of the County Council, pages 19 to 20 and the supplementary report 3 to 24. Our first report sets out details of the impact of the coronavirus and the Council's response. A supplementary report was circulated to all members of the Council yesterday and is published on our website. We have received comments from the Labour Group leader, Terry Einon, a copy of which is attached to the order paper marked 4. Dr. Einon has joined us in the Skype meeting, and she may have further questions once officers have presented the report. Can I ask that officers now take us through the report, omitting any reference, please, to the Bradgate Park Trust at this stage? So first we have the Chief. John, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just take the opportunity to pay tribute to Tom Purnell, who's going to take you through most of the report. Tom is the Assistant Chief Executive, and he's effectively been coordinating our resilience response to the pandemic. He chairs the daily meetings of the Council's Resilience Planning Group and supports the Chief Constable in his role as Vice Chair of the Resilience Forum, as well as representing the Council on the Goal Command of the Resilience Forum. So perhaps that's something you'd like to record as well.
Agreed. Tom's been working very, very hard on this. Just as he recovered from being the blow officer, he's now leading on coronavirus. Who's next are we calling, Chief?
It's Tom now, please.
Tom, we've just complimented you, so now's your moment to shine.
Thank you, John. So I'll kick off with an update on the work of the Resilience Forum and the Council's Crisis Management Group, and then I'll pick up a number of key issues before passing on to colleagues who will deal with some of the other key issues. So in terms of the Local Resilience Forum, the LRF's Strategic Coordinating Group, or SCG, continues to lead the response across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and is now chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable Rob Nixon, following the local declaration of a major incident several weeks ago. That SCG is supported by a tactical coordination group and a number of other cells, and those are shown in detail in the structure chart, which is attached as Appendix A. County Council officers fully engaged in that structure, chairing a number of the cells and active in all of the other relevant cells. And this structure is all supported by a resilience team, which is hosted at the County Council but funded by partners. Several LRF aspects to the response are highlighted in the sections on specific key issues in the report and will be picked up by myself and others during this presentation. Moving on to paragraph 18, which is headed Crisis Management. The Crisis Management Group, chaired by the Chief Executive, is leading the Council's response and is supported by a corporate resilience group, which, as John mentioned, I chair, and a subgroup chaired by the Assistant Director for Corporate Resources. Paragraph 19 sets out the strategic focus of the Crisis Management Group, with there being a particular focus on ensuring business continuity, the reallocation of resources to ensure that critical services can continue to be delivered, and increasingly now looking at the recovery process. Paragraph 20 sets out how the Cabinet, opposition group leaders and members more widely are being kept informed about the work that's been undertaken. Moving on to the first of some specific key issues, and if I can refer you to the school section, which starts at paragraph 37. As that paragraph sets out, the number of children attending school over the Easter period has been lower than in the pre-Easter weeks, and we know that not all children with an education and health care plan who are eligible to school are doing so. And the Department for Children and Family Services is undertaking a risk assessment of all children with a plan in line with DfE guidance. Free school meal vouchers continue to be issued through the National Voucher Scheme over the Easter period. We know that some parents have experienced difficulties obtaining the national voucher, and these concerns have been escalated to the Department for Education. In terms of children's social care and targeted early help, services to the most vulnerable children are continuing, so that includes children who are on a child protection plan or open to the Council's Children and Family Wellbeing Service, and the Department continues to take referrals for child protection, safeguarding and early help referrals, and take-up of those is being monitored. As is set out in paragraph 40, the government has issued revised guidance calling for an increased focus on ensuring those children who are vulnerable are attending school where it is safe for them to do so. The low numbers of vulnerable children attending schools is a concern. Nationally, it's reported that only 5% of such children have been attending education during the crisis, and that position is reflected in Leicestershire, and the Department is closely monitoring the situation and providing support to schools and parents. Moving on to paragraph 41, volunteer assurance and capacity. As I'm sure all members will be aware, there's been a very positive and commendable response from members of the general public who want to play their part in responding to the virus. Constructive, particularly through volunteering, constructive discussions have taken place with district councils and Voluntary Action Leicestershire regarding the assurance and coordination of volunteers, and further work is underway to ensure full understanding of volunteer capacity across the county, and clearly we're keen to ensure that volunteering effort is targeted in the right places and is done in the right way. On deaths management, through a mortality cell, the LRF has taken steps to ensure the area is able to manage the increased number of deaths that are being experienced. An additional mortuary at Leicester General Hospital is now open and being used, and that additional capacity means that the area now has sufficient capacity should the national reasonable worst case planning assumptions on additional deaths be realised locally. And in addition, partners, as set out in paragraph 43, have worked together to deal effectively and sensitively with the increased numbers of deaths and the need for social distancing rules to be obeyed by making changes to registration and funeral arrangements. Support for business. As everybody will be aware, the impact on many businesses has been severe. A business cell chaired by the Local Enterprise Partnership is providing advice to local businesses, signposting them to the national schemes that are available, and also is coordinating donations of PPE from local companies. And that cell will also have a critical role in planning for economic recovery, and the council's economic growth team is supporting that work, including providing some sector-specific support on tourism, hospitality and the creative sectors. Moving on to the Communities Fund, at your meeting on 24th of March, the Cabinet agreed to set up a £1 million Communities Fund to support the voluntary and community sector. Subsequently, that funding was increased to 1.5 million in view of the high number of applicants, and one of the recommendations covers that increase. The grant allocations made to date are set out in the table at paragraph 46, and a link is provided in paragraph 47 to more data being available on the awards that have been made. That fund has had a really positive response, clearly from applicants and groups that have been awarded funding, but also through the local press and radio coverage. And the council has received a Together We Care award from Leicestershire Cares, and the report refers to the Community Foundation, but it is actually Leicestershire Cares who made that award for outstanding support to the local community during the crisis. And I'll just briefly quote from the nomination, where they said that the council was nominated, and I quote now, "in recognition of the agile and effective way you stepped in and supported the community sector across the county with your Communities Fund. This swift action will save lives and deliver help and support to those most in need." Finally, from me, I'll just quickly talk about recovery planning. This starts off at paragraph 50, and the council and the Local Resilience Forum have made an early start on planning for recovery. I think what we know is that this will be a complex and lengthy process. It may be characterised by periods of easing of restrictions and then tightening as the government seeks to manage the outbreak. And we know that recovery will be taking place alongside an ongoing response to the virus. We can expect that different services will recover at different times, and also that we will need to focus both on mitigating the negative impacts of the virus, including some of the financial challenges that Chris will come on to talk about, but also harnessing some of the positive changes which have occurred as a consequence of how society has reacted to the current challenge. I think putting all those things together, it's going to be a complex challenge. We're going to be working very closely with the LRF on this, and the LRF approach focuses on three broad areas: supporting economic recovery, infrastructure recovery, and the human aspects of recovery, including community recovery. The council's corporate recovery group will be working over the next few weeks closely with services and support functions to scope out the approach to service recovery, and also to look at those services, to look in a targeted way those services which are likely to be most affected by relaxation of the lockdown in due course. And as part of that work, recovery plans will be developed for all of the council services. And finally, a more detailed report on recovery planning will be brought to your meeting on the 23rd of June. So that's everything from me, and I think I'm handing over to Mike Sands at this point.
You are. Go ahead, Mike. Hang on, Mike. Before you go ahead, I just want to say I've got 3 speakers. I've got Byron, Ivan, and Terry. With all respect to Byron and Ivan, I'm going to take Terry first because she actually wrote in. So when we've finished, Terry, I'll take you first, and then Byron, then Ivan. Okay, Mike.
Tom, thank you, Leader. So I'm going to start just by covering the health position set out in paragraphs 11 to 13. Things obviously move on. The figures are already correct on the day they're written. So in paragraph 11, there's actually now 858 confirmed cases of COVID-19 as of this morning. Although I think I remain optimistic that in line with the national picture, the rate of increase is slowing within Leicestershire as it has done over the last 3 or 4 weeks. With numbers increasing by 17% last week, not the 35% referred to in paragraph 11. So I think we can probably safely say that we are on that plateau somewhere near and just off the shoulder of the peak. Paragraph 12 refers to death data, and again that's been refreshed this morning by the Office of National Statistics. So for deaths up to the 17th of April that was registered before the 24th of April, 192 people from Leicestershire have died of COVID-19. 135 of those have died in the hospital setting, 46 within care homes, and 11 have died at home. Outbreaks in care homes remains our focus of attention, and as of the 24th of April, Public Health England reported that approximately 60 care homes within the county had either experienced outbreaks, that's 2 or more cases, or single cases of COVID-19, which is not far short of about 30% of the total number of care homes within Leicestershire. Moving on to paragraphs 26 to 29, which covers personal protective equipment. PPE, again in line with the national coverage, has been an ongoing issue of concern affecting both our staff, the county council staff, and our contracted staff on the front line delivering social care. There has been locally increasing anger and frustration at the inability to obtain sufficient PPE to meet essential requirements. The picture, I think, set out in paragraph 26 has improved a bit since the time that the paper was written. So we're now reporting 8%, I believe, of home care providers reporting reduced stocks and insufficient supplies, as opposed to the 19% in paragraph 26. But nonetheless, although we are managing day-to-day PPE stocks that are now only really assured for up to 72 hours at any given time. The Local Resilience Forum that Tom outlined its role earlier on is playing a great role, and indeed a fairly major role in provision of PPE across Leicester City, Leicestershire and indeed Rutland. 3 emergency drops have been received since April the 9th by the LRF for onward distribution to all organisations requesting PPE other than the secondary care part of the NHS across LLR. With the government's adult social care plan stating that further deliveries will continue to be made. However, it's not clear to us how often they'd be made, what their content would be, or indeed the prioritisation given to different LRFs, whether that's on percentage of older people or black and minority ethnic population, etc., etc. Nonetheless, the LRF is coordinating PPE as part of the regular discussions. There is a dedicated PPE cell which the County Council has a major role in advising the SCG as to prioritisation and stock allocation, and the LRS business cell coordinates the donation of PPE from local companies. Of particular note, as set out in paragraph 28, is a donation of 20,000 face masks, which has been made by the Sichuan province in China, which of course is twinned with Leicestershire, and these are expected to arrive this week, the week commencing the 27th of April. Within the council, we have issued guidance twice now for council staff on the appropriate use of PPE. This reflects the national guidance which has been sent out by Public Health England, and indeed internally we've now got a robust process for reviewing and allocating supply and demand processes within the council to make certain that our supplies are making the best of what we've got really from donations and from suppliers. Equally, the commissioning support unit within the council is working across LLR leading on the offers of manufacturing from potential suppliers for PPE, both now and indeed in the future. Lastly from me is key worker testing, which is set out in paragraphs 30 to 33. Obviously, a lot has moved again in this area since the paper was written. Key worker testing really is about for those workers who are self-isolating because a household member has developed symptoms where they would currently have to isolate for 14 days, or indeed if the key worker has symptoms themselves and has to isolate for 7 days if they lived on their own. If we can test and they prove negative, they can get back to work that much quicker and reduce the impact on the NHS and other key organisations. Things do change. The initial priority has been key worker testing, but as the paper sets out and has been in the news, that's now rapidly been expanded to all key workers in a large number of sectors, particularly including social care workers, as that testing capacity has increased. Different routes, as set out in paragraph 33, have come on stream. There is the national programme, which is based at Boots in Nottingham. Local provision has now started. It refers to Meridian Park in Leicester. That was the McDonald's that was reported in the Mercury. I believe that will be closed down in favour of another site that will be supported by the government as part of the national testing programme, which will be operational by Thursday. We are seeking to provide some kind of coordination to various routes into testing. The national.gov.uk website, which started since this paper was written, as well as the CQC, to make certain that employers and indeed GP systems are aware of the results that people have, aware of the results of the tests that people have had. And then lastly, the other two things which will be coming on stream, one of which is the postal kits. We refer to home testing in paragraph 33, which will be delivered by Amazon and the Royal Mail. And equally, there is some mention at the end of paragraph 33 at mobile test centres, and we believe that this will be logistically undertaken by the military and down to local negotiation about where such sites are put in place. We may wish to, for example, prioritise those areas which have seen higher numbers of cases or settings with cases in preference to other areas, but I'll pause there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. John Wilson. John Wilson.
Concerning shielding and protecting of vulnerable people, and as members will know, on the 23rd of March, government wrote to approximately 1.5 million people who've been identified as being at significant risk due to underlying health conditions, and encouraged those people to shield themselves from the virus and self-isolate. And in doing so, the government invited people to register for additional support in areas such as food delivery, medicines and social support. So as at the time of writing the report on the 24th of April, just under 15,000 Leicestershire residents had been written to by the government, and of those just under 10,000 had registered for support. That's now 10,500 people who registered for support as we speak, and of those around about 3,500, just under 3,500 have requested support with essential supplies. The Council is sharing this data with district and borough councils, and we are triaging all of the people who are registered. As it says in the report, 5,000 calls have been made by the 22nd of April. I'm pleased to say that as of today, that's gone up to 6,500 calls that have been made by the 40 staff who are now working on this within the County Council. There have been emergency food deliveries, over 3,000 deliveries by the government's central delivery service, and in addition to that, the County Council have made over 120 emergency deliveries of food and supplies to people who were in need of that. The original food that was given to the council for that purpose has now been exhausted, so the County Council is now in the process of purchasing and procuring additional food supplies that we can continue to give to people who may be in emergency situations, and we have an additional 100 food parcels available for that purpose. As members will be aware, the registered list is a dynamic list. It continues to grow as new people are added to the list, and we expect that to be the case for some time to come. There is also a further complication in that the Department of Works and Pensions are contacting people directly who are identified as being on the list but who haven't registered. So if people are on the list and they've received a letter from government but they haven't responded to that letter, they are receiving telephone calls from the Department of Work and Pensions and contracted providers on their behalf, asking them to register. And then in addition, just in the last week, we've heard that the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government is now requiring us to provide information on a weekly basis on people who are vulnerable. So that's the update on vulnerable people. And the second area I wanted to talk about today in the report starts at paragraphs 34 through to 36 in relation to adult social care provision. As it says in the report, there is still capacity within the adult care market to continue to provide services and to place packages of care. In the care home market, which Mike referred to earlier, we have sufficient capacity to continue to place people in care home placements, although it's fair to say that the number of and the capacity for placements of people who are COVID positive or who have COVID symptomology is much reduced. But we are still able to make those placements. A number of providers are reluctant to admit new people for obvious reasons, concerns around infection control, PPE, staff absence, particularly where that affects management and leadership positions within care homes. And there are, as Mike said, a number of care homes, probably around 28% of our care homes, that now have infection outbreaks. We are continuing to support that sector. It is a sector that requires additional support, and we are providing support in the way of guidance, training, helping them in terms of recruitment. And we will continue to do that over the course of the next few weeks. Domiciliary care provision, home care services are in probably in a better position in terms of being able to manage people who are COVID symptomatic. Obviously, because they're working with people who are in their own homes, the spread of infection is much reduced, and there is capacity in the market to continue to provide home care as required and to support people on discharge from hospital. The final area I just probably want to touch on is members may be aware that there's been some news in the media around a small number of local authorities who have notified the Secretary of State that they intend to implement Care Act easements. So this is where the changes to the legislation. Suffice to say that Leicestershire County Council is not in that position, and at this present time we have no intention of notifying the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Chris Tambini.
Thank you, Leader. Coronavirus is clearly going to have a profound impact on the County Council's finances, and the report estimates that this could be in the region of £50 million in the current financial year, and that's net of the £15 million we've already received from government. I would put a bit of a health warning on the estimate. I mean, it is a pretty rough estimate, given the massive uncertainties that we currently face. In terms of the impact, I think it's split over two main headings. One is around extra costs, and I'm not going into this in detail because I think Tom and John and Mike have really gone through that in a lot of detail, but there's clearly a lot of extra costs associated with the work that the County Council's doing. But there's probably an equal impact in terms of the County Council's income. Our key sources of income are council tax and business rates, and clearly our tax take does reflect the strength of the wider economy, and then clearly the virus is going to have a massive impact in terms of the overall economics of the country. So that's something that will impact both in the short term and probably have a longer term impact over the next kind of 2 or 3 years as well. Also, in terms of income, we do expect some of our commercial income to reduce from things like school meal service, and also some of the income we receive from some of our commercial property. So there will be an impact, at least in the short term, in terms of income. I think increasingly over coming months we will return to the medium-term financial impact of this. So I think it will change, and as I say, the extent of the impact will really reflect the extent of the impact on the wider economy. If I end by just kind of just talking briefly about our kind of work with suppliers. We are trying to balance the support to suppliers with the need to ensure that our own finances remain resilient. And the initial guidance in terms of supply management is attached to this report. I think the key principle is to ensure that all suppliers are signposted to the appropriate government support, and we really focus our resources on making sure that our critical suppliers for our major critical services are funded adequately, and we ensure that market, principally around social care, is resilient. I think the key message really is that this is clearly a major kind of health issue, but also increasingly is a financial and economic issue as well.
Thank you, Chris. We've just got the Chief wants to add something. John?
Thank you, Chairman. Just in respect of paragraph 44 of the report, recycling and household waste sites, could I draw your attention to recommendation little 4, the top of page 2 of the Green Order paper, because that's a convenient way of updating the Cabinet on the current position. So if I start at the top, we do not have any further government guidance as of today, but we expect it soon. I understand something was said in Parliament this morning. As I advised members last week, we are planning to reopen some sites, and the current intention is to do that in the week commencing the 18th of May. You cannot open these sites straight away. An awful lot of planning is necessary, and that is in hand. It is unfortunate that certainly in the public debate, the impression has been given that in some way these sites are substitutes for curbside collections. They're not. The district councils are the waste collection authorities, and we've asked them, and this confirms the request, please to have 2 weeks' worth of bulk and green waste collections completed prior to the reopening of the recycling sites. Otherwise, our sites will be overwhelmed immediately. And the last point is that in the last 24 hours, there's been a lot of discussion with the other waste disposal authorities in the region to see if we can all reopen at the same time and to provide the same facility for what I think are obvious reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I think it's very important the districts do collect in the bulky waste. I know a lot of them are restarting the green waste, but we need them to collect in some of the bulky waste, otherwise our sites will be overwhelmed within the first few hours. Okay, so I'm going to take Terry first because Terry wrote in. So Terry?
Thank you, Chair. And this really was a report from the Labour Group that we wanted to make a public record of our support for this Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, to make it, to make a public record of our thanks to officers, and also to mention some of the issues that we've raised and the pleasing responses that we've seen from this Council. The issues that we remain concerned about, as well as to, at the end, some questions that we will continue to raise in the weekly all-members meeting, and very much to thank Democratic Services officers for the exemplary way that they have kept all members of this Council involved in this endeavour. And just to then, of the major issues, which I hope that the Cabinet will consider, yes, there's been in the media, and quite rightly, a focus on the National Health Service, but we as local government have shouldered the responsibility for the social care and public health response to this pandemic, and this is not only most important now, but is likely to become increasingly important over the next few weeks and months. So the concerns about the financial impact on our councils is a serious concern, and I do hope that we will be lobbying our MPs for support in this. And then also recovery is going to be a long and complicated process, which will probably involve changing some of our current practices and procedures over a medium to longer term, and I'm hoping that there will be an opportunity there for members to perhaps be involved in a more focused way, maybe as a members' recovery working group or something of that ilk. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that, Terry. Well, as the leader of the administration, I've tried my best to ensure that both yourself as the Labour group leader and the Liberal group leader are involved. So I thank you for your comments. I agree entirely with you on the social care and the work that we do here. So thanks very much, Terry. And the recovery group, we spoke about it this morning, Terry, and the Chief will be in touch with you and Simon in due course about how we're going to set it up, but set one up we will. So the next person I've got is Byron.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I want to talk about the finance aspects, but just before that, can I add my appreciation of all our staffs, especially the care workers out in the community, many who work for contractors who've all stepped up to the mark and continue to deliver a very high quality service, and that's really appreciated by everyone we serve, and certainly people in my division. On the financial side, Tim Stambini's clearly set out the vulnerability, which is a staggering amount of money, £50 million, in addition to the 15 million we've already had, and very clearly the government need to step up to the mark and look after local government in the way they've looked after other sectors. And I hope that they will do that. And there's a further tranche coming, and hopefully we'll get a similar allocation as to the first one, another 15 from that. But still, we shall need much more if we continue to do the job. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in very difficult situations in a few months' time, continuing to deliver services. And the other thing I would want to say is that I'm happy to support the £90,000 loan to the Bradgate Park Trust as well. I know you've got an interest in that, Leader, but I will support that aspect of it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, although we're not mentioning that till I've gone out of the room. I've got Ivan Old.
Thank you, Leader. And I first of all start by thanking all the officers and staff in Children and Families Department who have really risen to the occasion. If I take first response, they are now, instead of sitting side by side in one room, spread out all round the floor of the building and still doing a really good job. We know, and I've been in a LEAP meeting, Leicestershire Education Excellence Partnership meeting, from 12 o'clock through to 1 o'clock today, that there are worries out there as to how schools and early years settings are going to meet the challenge of coronavirus, not least in some confusion over whether there will be adequate supplies of personal protective equipment. Hopefully we will get good answers to that. The issue of only 5% of vulnerable children attending school is one that is discussed regularly with me by Jane Moore, our director, and also with my support member, Deborah Taylor. And we are very well briefed on that. And it is very good to know that our authority, I think, is almost setting an exemplar in the way that we're following up on children who may be at risk and challenging where those children are not actually being sent to school and finding out the reasons why. I also would like to thank foster parents. It's difficult to be a foster parent. It's a very praiseworthy role to undertake, but when the young people that you are fostering have had their routine thrown out by schools closing, it can become quite difficult. And I think the work that they've done has been excellent. We know that there are rising incidences of mental health issues. We know that domestic violence is about 30% up. And in that context, just once again to repeat, I think our officers have done a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. I've got Trevor Pendleton.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to pick up something which the Chief Exec mentioned in terms of residual waste collection. Under present government guidelines, of course, this is not an essential journey, and that's one of the reasons why our residual waste operation had to be curtailed. Of course, it's being presented in the press quite as though it's an either or, and really the districts and boroughs have not helped us, I'm afraid, but they are getting back, thankfully, to beginning to pick up, certainly in my own district. Today we've had glass and paper and plastic, none of the heavy garden stuff yet, but bless them, you know, what with social distancing and everything else, which we of course have to do as well. the districts are beginning to get back. We, of course, will be and are looking at providing the residual waste continuation as soon as we get at least a good pickup from the districts and boroughs. And we will then, of course, and my team are looking at precisely reinstating those on a 7-day-a-week basis as soon as we can. I really would like to say of the team, they are doing a fantastic job and are, of course, working in conjunction with the police as well. Enough said at the moment, maybe the feasibility of a booking system, all sorts of things, but we are certainly on it, and when we're given permission, we'll be able to consider opening in a very useful way. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Trevor. Right, as I mentioned earlier, I have a personal interest in the Bradgate Park Trust as its chairman, so I'm going to leave the meeting for the remainder of the item so that the recommendation regarding the trust be considered. Blake Payne, my deputy, will take over. Thank you. Blake.
Thank you, Leader. I'll give you an opportunity to leave the room. Okay, for the benefit of the online meeting, the Leader has now left the room and I've formally taken the chair for the remainder of this item. Can I ask the Director of Corporate Resources to explain the Bradgate Park Trust loan proposal, please? Chris?
Thank you. We have received a request for a loan of £90,000 from the Bradgate Park Trust, and a similar request has also been part of the city as well. The trust is suffering cash flow issues since it closed a few weeks ago. It is principally funded by car park income and also cafe sales. They have furloughed a number of staff, but clearly they do have staff that need to kind of continue with kind of essential maintenance. They've also got a fairly large deer herd and security issues, so they had to maintain some staff. As with any loan request, there are risks, but clearly Bradgate Park is a very popular park, and at some point it will reopen, and I'm sure traded income will recover. The report does recommend that the loan request is approved.
Thank you, Chris. That's very clear. Can I invite any of the comments from members joining the meeting online? Kat? I understand Mr. Rhodes would like to make a comment. Mr. Rhodes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. Just to reaffirm what I said earlier, and I'm happy to move this particular aspect if you're taking the vote separately to the rest of it.
Thank you for that, Mr. Rhodes. That won't be necessary because I'm now going to invite Lee Brecken, who is actually at the meeting, to make some comments and I think second the motion, and then we'll take it on bulk. Lee.
Thank you, Blake. I am just going to re-emphasise the recommendation D, which is on this report today, which is really to emphasise the Cabinet's continued appreciation for the work done by all of our officers at Leicestershire County Council, by the LRF partners, by all of our members at Leicestershire County Council, and also the cooperation and involvement of all of the residents of Leicestershire. I believe the level of information being shared by officers and partners becomes a vital part for everyone to understand where we are and also where we are going. So I'm very proud and happy to second the recommendations on the order paper.
Okay, so I'll formally move the recommendations. They've been formally seconded by Mr. Brecken. Can I just state for the record my thanks and indeed the rest of the Cabinet's thanks on behalf of the County Council to all those involved in the fight against this virus in Leicestershire. You're doing an amazing job. Can we now move to a vote? I will now ask the other Cabinet members to indicate if they are in agreement with the recommendations. Will each of you please indicate by saying for or against when I call your name? Mr. Blunt.
For.
Mr. Brecken.
For.
Mr. Old.
For.
Mr. Pendleton.
For.
Mrs. Richardson.
4.
Mr. Rhodes?
4.
Mr. Shepherd?
4.
And of course, myself, I'm 4 too. So it's been moved, seconded. All those have voted in favour. That closes the item. Thank you. We'll just wait for the leader to retake his chair.
Okay, thank you, Blake. So have we got to move the recommendations on the rest of the stuff? Very good, thank you very much. Item 5, Leicestershire County Council's revised strategic plan 2018 to 2022, pages 21 to 54. Next report seeks the Cabinet's agreement for the revised strategic plan. It will be submitted to full council for approval. That is when we ever have one. The plan has been amended to reflect the Council's declaration of a climate emergency in May of 2019 and has been subject to consultation with scrutiny. Comments have been received from David Bill, which are attached to the order paper marked 5. Before I ask officers to present the report, I'd like Blake Payne to say a few words as the lead member for all environmental matters. So, Blake, over to you.
Okay, I guess what I'll say applies equally to the next agenda item, which is the environment strategy also. So with that in mind, you'll be aware that the County Council resolved in May 2019 to declare a climate emergency and to update the environment strategy 2018 to 2030 to reflect the aims of achieving carbon neutrality for the Council's own operations by 2030 and for Leicestershire by 2050. Subsequently, it was agreed at the Cabinet meeting in September 2019 that the Council's Strategic Plan 2018 to 2022 and Single Outcome Framework would be revised to enhance the existing environment and climate change commitments it already contained. The situation that has affected people across the globe due to the COVID-19 pandemic has required unprecedented changes to the way we live our lives, which could not have been foreseen when carrying out the review of these documents. However, the Council's environmental ambitions remain unchanged and the climate emergency is still an immediate and pressing challenge. The response to the pandemic has brought about a step change in how we live. Some changes have shown clear benefits for the environment and offer a positive kickstart to our journey to net zero. As highlighted by the Scrutiny Commissioners, the policy commitments in the strategic plan reflect a point in time and will need to be reviewed in full at the appropriate time. There are implications for the county and the district councils in terms of their responsibilities and their funding. The full review will need to consider the changes that have come about because of the coronavirus outbreak and the actions we have all taken to save lives and protect the NHS. It is important that we maintain our focus on the protection and improvement of the environment to ensure that we gain the benefits this will bring to our communities. As ever, it will be the role of the County Council to show leadership, to balance the environmental, social and economic goals and work with our partners for the benefit of everyone. Already in the early stages, the environment has been identified as a priority in the recovery planning, which is now underway. The Council's strategic plan will be subject to a detailed review, which will begin later this year or early next year. However, the Council's environment strategy, and more specifically the related action plan, is well placed to recognise and adopt to specific issues arising from the coronavirus outbreak in the short term. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Blake. We're now going to call Zafar, Head of Communities, to take us through the report. Are you there, Zafar?
I am. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Payne summarised the situation accurately, and thank you for that, Mr. Payne. So I'll just very briefly just go through the principal issues. The first thing, in terms of a timeline, as Mr. Payne's pointed out, this was a point in time, and the Council declared a climate emergency through resolution at full Council in May 2019, and it was on that basis that a report was taken through a full consultation, initially internally through officers at CMT and then individual directorates, and then went to ENT Overview Committee, and then after that to full Scrutiny Commission, and the report recognise that and takes those recommendations into account. In terms of the actual changes that are proposed, there's two sets of changes. First of all, to the plan itself, and they're set out at paragraph 16, and then there's changes to the outcomes framework itself, which are set out at paragraph 17. The concern from members, as highlighted by Mr. Payne, was that there should be no watering down of the environmental credentials, and to some extent, as we move to recovery, environmental issues shouldn't play second fiddle to, for example, the need to get the economy growing again. And I think through the statement Mr. Payne's made, we've given a firm commitment to that, and we've recognised that at paragraph 30 of the report. The only thing, just for clarification, and again as further reassurance, a group of officers is currently looking at the recovery stage, and as part of that process, myself and the head of transformation, Chris Lewis, we will be looking to see how we can bring forward perhaps an early and more comprehensive and significant review of the strategic plan to start in September 2020. So hopefully we'll be able to make further changes to the strategic plan, which will then influence a full-blown revised plan to take place at the end of the current cycle of this plan, which is March-April 2021. So at this point, that's probably as much as I need to say, given the quite comprehensive statement that Mr. Payne has given.
Thank you, Zafar.
Happy to take questions.
Hang on, Zafar, thank you very much. Can I first of all, Zafar, I forgot to thank you for the work you did on the Leicestershire Communities Fund under agenda item 4. So can you convey our thanks as the administration to you and your team for the excellent work you did in turning around the grant so swiftly, and they're greatly appreciated out there. So I'll move the motion on the order paper. Blake?
I will second the motion on the order paper, Leader.
Okay, I've got nobody indicating to speak, Zafar, so we're just going to take the vote. So it's a given that myself and Mr. Payne have voted in favour. So I go to Mr. Blunt, for or against.
For.
Mr. Brecken, for or against.
For.
Ivan, for or against.
For.
Trevor.
For.
Louise.
For.
Byron.
For.
Richard Shepherd, that is.
For.
Okay, thank you. That's everybody voting in favour, Jenny. So we're now going to move on to agenda item 6. Leicestershire County Council's revised Environment Strategy and Action Plan. This is on pages 55 to 98. It presents the Council's revised environmental strategy and the Tranche 1 carbon reduction roadmap. The Cabinet is asked to agree that the documents be submitted to, it says here, the Council meeting on the 8th of July, so that's the next one we've got. I've got comments from Max. Can I just ask you, Max, did you want to speak now or after Anne Carruthers? Max?
I'm happy to speak now if you like, Leader.
Yeah, go ahead, Max.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the officers for the hard work they've put into this, and also to thank the Deputy Leader for his very helpful remarks. The two matters that concern myself and the Labour Group are firstly that the Tranche 2, which, as you'll see from the papers that you've received from both me and the Council officers, Tranche 2 is about 80% of the admissions. And unless we address Tranche 2, Tranche 1 on its own makes the Council look good, but it doesn't do for the community in the fight to hold back climate change. Now, the elephant in the room, particularly regarding Tranche 2, is that transport, everybody realises it's there, but nobody talks about it. And it's essential that our second issue here is that if Tranche 2 is delayed for another year, which is what the paper seems to propose, that means that we're not making any progress on transport in particular, which is the thing that's holding us back in Leicestershire. That's not all bad news, because Grant Shapps, the new Secretary of State for Transport, has just released a paper called Decarbonising Transport, which points the way. And having produced the priorities as far as 2025 to 2050 in a recent cabinet meeting, we're well positioned now to look at that document and do the task that he's inviting us to do, which is to comment on his heads of terms, really, so that he can come back before the end of the year with some proposals. It's important that we contribute to that paper, and in doing so, we're really doing the job of kicking off Tranche 2. Tranche 2 mirrors the work that the Department for Transport is asking us to do. And I can only conclude that Tranche 2 is being held up for resource reasons. But what I'm arguing is that we have to use the resource to apply to the decarbonisation of transport paper, and we've done most of the work, and furthermore, a lot of the work is done by partners, and it's done by consulting with partners, which is a planning exercise. And I cannot see how this is nothing but the best opportunity, whilst we're going through this hiatus of this pandemic, to do the planning. We don't plan to succeed, we plan to fail. And I'd like to see our work getting on with Tranche 2. Thanks very much, Nick.
Very good, Max. We're going to take Anne Carruthers first, then Blake will come back. So, Anne, over to you.
Good afternoon, Leader. Thanks very much to Mr. Hunt's comments there, and I'll come on to them just in a moment. As with the strategic plan that we've just heard about in the previous item, the environment strategy, the supporting action plan to it, and the tranche 1 of the carbon reduction roadmap, which are appended to your papers, have been revised to reflect the climate commitment that the County Council made last year for carbon neutrality on its own emissions by 2030 and the county's emissions, i.e. the Tranche 2 work that's just Mr. Hunt's just referred to, by 2050. We've consulted on these revised documents, and the paper sets out the feedback we've had on that. In addition to embedding the commitment, a number of key changes have been made to the environment strategy itself, and that they are set out in paragraph 30 of the report. The supporting action plan has also been updated, and again, as was referred to in the previous item about the strategic plan, that is best placed to reflect changes coming out of the current COVID situation and how we might want to adapt some of those actions. That very much is a live document. The carbon reduction roadmap at Appendix C of the papers covered what we're calling those Tranche 1, i.e. Leicestershire County Council's own emissions, which is approximately 13,000 tonnes. And it sets out our initial plans to address and reduce those emissions to get to carbon neutrality. And the projects that will take us there, we're anticipating at the moment, are set out in Table 1 on page 62 of the report. Work will be undertaken to identify the carbon reduction work, that's the initiatives that will be needed to address those Tranche 2 emissions that Mr. Hunt's mentioned across the county. This work's far more wide-reaching and challenging, given the role of the County Council is one of encouraging, influencing and working with other parties and partners and agencies to do what they need to do to reduce their emissions. That work, however, I would stress, is still ongoing. It will be merged with Tranche 1 as we develop that, and then brought back when we're in a position to really have the full thinking around that and clarity coming out of the COVID situation, and that will come back to Cabinet and Council next summer. The strategy, the action plan and the carbon reduction roadmap we're presenting to the Environment and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee and to the Scrutiny Commission, as well as being circulated to the Health and Wellbeing Board. Environment and Transport Scrutiny Committee specifically highlighted matters of waste disposal, biodiversity and air quality, and the Scrutiny Commissioners concluded that while the objectives of the Environment Strategy remain relevant, revisions in the action plan would be likely to take into account the impacts of the current COVID situation. So very much, seeing that as a live document. The Health and Wellbeing Board supports the strategy, and their comments focused on the objective of capturing some of the positive aspects coming out of the current pandemic situation in order to reduce emissions. If we just come back to Mr. Hunt's comments to specifically address some of the points that he's raised there. I would reassure Mr. Hunt that we're not delaying this work. The work is actually ongoing. Tranche 1 is very much full steam ahead because we can't miss opportunities. And as you see from the attachment in terms of that carbon reduction roadmap, we have clear plans to take us to reducing our own emissions. Tranche 2 work will be ongoing. The timescales have been moved to next summer to acknowledge the extent of the work and the challenges that we're engaging in at the moment because of COVID, and some of the challenges both we and other organisations are having in doing that. I don't think, and as Mr. Hunt says, it's not all bad news, because in relation to COVID, actually there could be some real opportunities to accelerate some initiatives that will reduce emissions, and there's even some within our own organisation we're beginning to identify as part of the recovery model. So as other agencies, partners, organisations across the county begin to think of recovery, there are opportunities to accelerate some of the things in the future business models that will bring down emissions. So I think there really will be some wins to gain from this. In terms of the DFT's decarbonising transport strategy, we will be fully engaging with the DFT's development work. It's they're looking at real partnership development work over the next few months across the country, and we will be engaging in that. And we will be coming back to Environment and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee with this to seek that committee's input to that work. So again, just to reassure Mr. Hunt there. And finally, just to conclude, the report seeks approval of the Cabinet to take forward the revised Environment Strategy, its action plan and the carbon reduction roadmap to County Council in July for its consideration. Thank you, Leader.
Great. And Blake?
Thank you, Leader. Firstly, can I move the motion on the Green Order paper under 6? And can I now just return to the comments that have been made by Max, but also note the comments that have been sent in by Mr. David Bill of the Liberal Democrat Group. I think I've covered Mr. Bill's comments in my initial statement at the front of the previous agenda item, in that we acknowledge that the strategic plan will need a further review down the line, and we also acknowledge, in accordance with the debate that took place at the Scrutiny Commission, that COVID has presented us with an opportunity to take stock and explore some of the, if you like, the environmental benefits arising from a reduction of transport and different working arrangements and different behaviours within the environment that we live in. So with that in mind, can I just say that we acknowledge that when it comes to the environment strategy, that tranche 1 is challenging. There are 13,000 tonnes of carbon emissions. In fact, we've included greenhouse gas emissions within that figure that we still need to reduce to take stock of our own operations here at County Hall. But the wider figure of 4.5 million tonnes of carbon, which is emitted across Leicestershire, whether that be through traffic on the M1, whether aeroplanes operating from East Midlands Airport, businesses and energy systems out there in the wider county. We're going to need a lot of help to explore how we can best approach and influence the reduction of those carbon emissions. So to that extent, we've already invested and agreed £16 million worth of plans to tackle carbon emissions across Leicestershire, and we've also authorised about £400,000 to explore how we approach that tranche 2 work. So in that spirit, we're not delaying unnecessarily the tranche 2 work. We're just very pragmatically taking account of what the Scrutiny Commission and the Scrutiny Commissioners would like us to do, which is to take stock of the COVID situation, and also very pragmatically exploring how we best approach that very, very challenging albeit wicked problem of reducing the 4.5 million tonnes of wider carbon emissions in the Tranche 2 work. But be assured, we've set ourselves a target by 2030 to reduce our own carbon emissions to net zero, and we are working to the government's target of 2050 for the wider emissions. It is challenging. I believe Leicestershire is one of the leading authorities in the whole country. It speaks volumes that even though we're here in the midst of the COVID crisis, we're here as a cabinet moving these motions today, and I think that proves how serious we treat this agenda and how serious the future of this agenda applies to Leicestershire. So having said that, Leader, can I just simply once again move the item on the Green Order paper and allow yourself to second? Thank you.
I think we're allowing Trevor to second and speak. Trevor?
Thank you, Leader. And in seconding that item, I would just like to say that, okay, it is challenging, but just remember how highly proactive we were, and we were actually one of the first out of the starting blocks as a council to rise to this challenge, and I think that augurs well for the concluding, if you like, sign-off at county council level when we get there with all the complications that we have to go through. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, so we'll be taking the vote now. So if we assume that Blake, who moved, and Trevor, who seconded, have voted, so I call first of all Richard Blunt.
For.
Lee Brecken.
For.
Ivan.
For.
Louise.
For.
Byron.
For.
Richard Shepherd.
For.
Thank you very much. That is approved. Agenda item 7, Leicestershire County Council's Equality Strategy 20 to 24 and the Equality Action Plan 2020 to 2021. These are on pages 99 to 162. It presents the outcome of the consultation on the strategy and seeks approval for the strategy and the first annual report, action plan, to be submitted to County Council for approval. I presume that'll be on July the 8th, all being well. Zafar is going to present the report, and then I'll ask Louise, who's got responsibility, to speak. So over to you, Zafar.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the report, it's relatively straightforward. The current equality and diversity strategy is coming up to, it's gone through a process of full consultation during its life cycle. We've set out and it's largely a light touch review of the strategy and more comprehensive changes to the one-year action plan. So that makes sure it's a live document rather than something that stays on the shelf. And what we aim to do is build on the positive work and achievements which are identified in the report. As stated, it's because it's a statutory framework, it needs to go up to full council for approval. And we're hoping to build on our current successes. Just as a reminder, and I'm sure Cabinet is aware of our legal duties, we're under a statutory duty as set out in the Equality Act 2010 to do various things. We've got to promote equality of opportunity, challenge discrimination, and there's various specific duties which are set out in paragraph 13. So these are legal regulations and compliance issues. So we must publish our equality and diversity objectives. They must be smart, and all the targets within our plan have been checked through the business intelligence team, and so they are measurable, and there are Tableau dashboards behind it, all those targets, whether they cover service delivery issues or employment issues. And we also must publish the outcomes of our achievements again annually through our report. So in terms of perhaps some highlights, I think overall we're doing very well. And that's reflected in section 25 of the consultation exercise. Again, I have to be fair and honest and say 213 doesn't seem like a considerable amount of responses, but carrying out any type of public consultation is difficult. I think this is more about the quality of the consultation as opposed to the sheer numbers, and we've tried to reach out to various groups, including our own Equality Challenge group, which is a representative section of the local communities, whether that's faith, whether that's particular protected characteristics. We've also gone through the trade unions, we've also gone through the employee groups as well. So we're reasonably confident that the comments we've had are fair and accurate, and we've taken them into account. In terms of, very quickly, the equality objectives, they're set out in section 29 there. And what we seek to do is improve our evidence base, so that we're clear why we are taking actions, and more importantly, clear why we're not taking actions. And that's going to be increasingly important as officers will be putting forward perhaps some difficult decisions for elected members to take into account. And it's very important that as officers there is an evidence base behind that, and then members have confidence that what they've been asked to consider is based on, as I said, statistics, consultation and information. What we also aiming to do at paragraph 29B there is do more work around community cohesion and community relations. I think it's fair to say that it's a very challenging environment out there. There are some groups who for some reason are particularly attacked, whether that's through social media due to sexual orientation. There are some misunderstandings around religious practices, etc. So we aim to do positive media campaigns to try and challenge that, and also set an example for ourselves. What we also try and do at paragraph C there is to have more inclusive services, or improve on our inclusiveness, and have some quite challenging targets there. Again, through Mrs. Richardson, we are showing leadership and we are celebrating our successes. Again, there's probably more we can do there, because I suspect there's sections of the wider community that are not aware of what we're trying to do. And finally, we're committed to improving the skills of our workforce and improving workforce representation. So I'd like to commend the report as it is. Happy to take any questions based on either the consultation exercises or any of the equality and diversity objectives within the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Zafar. Thank you, Louise. It certainly is a piece of very, very good work. It may well be a legal requirement, but since I've been the leader here, I've always thought it was very important that we produce these reports. We should be proud of our work and proud of our commitment to it. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, can I publicly thank the staff within the department. Many have been very busy on the Resilience Forum cells and also the community funds. So I am well aware of how busy and active they have been, so I do thank them for that. I think in regard to equalities, we have to remember that we all have a responsibility, individually as well as collectively, to ensure everyone's accepted and has the same opportunities. And throughout the current strategy, we have been developing a more risk and evidence-based approach, and this has enabled us to prioritise specific areas of concern rather than trying to do absolutely everything all at once. The strategy, as Zafar has said, has had widespread consultation in the respect of the different groupings. I know the numbers aren't great, but we even went to our own youth council, etc. And the strategy I'm very pleased with as having an inward-facing objective, but also that important outward-facing objective to the communities. Obviously, with the impacts of COVID-19, we will be looking at actions to take as part of the Council's response and recovery programmes, because not everybody has been affected equally in that either. So that will be taken up through the action plans. but I'm very happy and very proud to support the recommendations in this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Excellent work. Lee?
Thank you, Leader. In seconding the recommendations on the order paper, I think the revised strategy has been through a really thorough 12-week consultation. It does show in the report, it's a good report. There was good engagement, including our own scrutiny. And it's always good to see that some of the suggested changes that were being suggested have actually been taken on board, and they actually appear in the strategy here today, so I'm more than happy to second.
Good. So moved by Louise, seconded by Lee. I'm in favour. So next person to call is Blake Payne.
4.
Richard Blunt.
4.
Ivan.
4.
Trevor.
4.
Byron.
4.
Richard Shepherd.
4.
Great. It's all approved. Thank you very much. Agenda item 8, mainstream and special educational needs home to school transport policies 20 to 21. These are on pages 163 to 168. It advises the Cabinet of the position with regard to the implementation of mainstream home to school transport policy and special educational needs transport policy, which was originally approved by Cabinet in March of 2018, but has been delayed due to judicial review proceedings. Please note we've got comments again from Max. These are attached to the order paper marked 8. I'll take Anne Carruthers first, and then I'll ask Max if he wants to say anything, then I shall be going to Trevor and Ivan. So first of all, over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Leader. As you've just said, our home to school mainstream SEN transport policy was approved by Cabinet in March 2018. However, it has not been fully implemented, basically because we had a judicial review. That concluded July last year, finding in favour of the Council. However, we then had an appeal on one aspect of the judicial review decision. That appeal concluded earlier this month, finding in favour again of the Council. Given the appeal decision was not known until earlier this month, however, in consultation with lead member, I paused the implementation of the new policy from this September to the following September. This is fundamentally due to we've got insufficient time to advise parents of the transport options for the new academic year, receive their applications, deal with the appeals and undertake the work to put that transport in place or the arrangements around that. So the decision was taken to pause so that we can enable parents to have certainty about transport for the coming academic year. As part of the judicial review decision, the judge indicated that the personal travel budget element should be reviewed to make more transparent the amount that would be allocated to a parent or carer for their child. Work has been undertaken then to take this on board and to action that, and the rates proposed for the personal travel budgets are as per the table set out in paragraph 23 of the report. These rates ensure people who previously had voluntary PTBs would be no worse off under the new rates that we're proposing to implement. These new rates for the voluntary PTB, so we've already got people who take up that option voluntarily, will be operational from this September. And the default personal travel budget element of the policy will follow and be implemented in the following academic year, September 21. In terms of the MTFS position, originally we'd anticipated £420,000 of savings through the implementation of this policy. Given that only a small number of elements have been implemented that weren't subject to the judicial review or the appeal, which were the removal of low-income exemption and a grant allocation for low-income and rurally isolated mainstream post-16 transport, we've made savings of around £70,000. The remaining savings will be deferred until the implementation of the full policy and are be considered as part of the next MTFS refresh. Lastly, as you've said, Mr Hunt has submitted a number of questions and seeks reassurance in various aspects of this policy. I shall be writing to Mr Hunt shortly to provide him with a full response to the points that he's raised. The recommendations of the report are as in the order paper supplied. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Anne. So if you write to Max, that'll save him having to ask a question. So over to you, Trevor.
Thank you, Leader. Well, as you've heard, it's been a long time coming. It will be 2 years, but we're actually in the downhill run to getting this implemented. And I'm happy that there is, and now has been for a little while, some good transparency. The pausing will allow, in part, this to be very well worked through for the post-16s as well, and the team will have to work extremely hard to get this done in any case by the timescales that we've set out. So I'm really pleased in a sense that we have paused it, and with that I'm very happy to move the recommendations under sections A, B and C on page 3 of the order paper. Thank you, Leader.
Super. Ivan.
Thank you, Leader, and I'm very content to second the motion, and I welcome the outcome of the judgments.
Thank you. So if we assume, Jenny, that Trevor and Ivan have voted in favour, going down the list, Blake.
4.
Rich.
4.
Lee.
4.
Louise.
4.
Byron.
4.
Richard.
4.
And myself, 4. Thank you. Agenda item 9 is items referred from overview and scrutiny. We haven't got any. Agenda item 10 is any other items which we've decided to take as urgent. We don't have any. So that brings our first electronic cabinet meeting to a close. Thank you all very much for attending, either in person or by Skype.